Hey everybody. Everything that Kevin just talked about applies to what we're going to show you next, so it's a very timely presentation. I'm Brett Goldsmith. I'm an account executive for Applied Information Sciences, and for the project that we are going to be presenting, I also serve as the program manager. I'm here with my colleague Jim Mullennix, who is our cloud solution architect and the tech lead for our project. So a little bit about AIS. We've been a managed service partner since 1994. We have 6 gold competencies, and we've been heavily invested in Azure since 2008. So we're going on 10 years of Azure. Today we're going to talk about a case study about moving a production application into Azure Gov. So we've migrated applications from many government agencies. In this briefing, we're going to talk about some common challenges that we faced. We're going to touch on some important concepts. We're going to then highlight some of our successes. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jim to walk through some of the magic behind the scenes. He's going to go through the architecture, and he's also going to show you a demo. So I can't name the customer, but I can explain the nuances and some of the intricacies of some real-world challenges that we faced. I can tell you that this customer was not the Space Force, although someday I do hope to work with that customer once they set up that agency. So these are the challenges and many of the pain points that our customers face, and I think that probably some of your customers face the same kind of pain points. They have disparate systems throughout. They can't leverage the data. Some of the major challenges are they have high maintenance costs. Their infrastructure is very, very expensive. They're slow to innovate and adopt new technologies, and that's because they just don't have exposure to it. And one of the main things that I hear is that the capabilities just take too long to bring the production. So we're working on the second iteration of this effort. The first effort was locked into one specific cloud, and I think they realized at some point that they needed to be bigger than just one cloud. And so some of the issues they ran into on the first iteration was there was no real automation going on. Everything was manual, and looking around the world, they saw things could be done better. So this is an enterprise-level organization, and they want to move faster, and not just a little bit faster, exponentially faster. They're looking to have a multi-cloud environment, and so they want to take advantage of all the elastic computing and all the purchasing power that comes with that type of a setup. They want value-added services, and they want innovation, as the cloud providers can bring them and make it available. They also want the competition to drive down cost. So right now, at this particular customer, we have Azure and AWS. But as other clouds become available, they're planning on bringing them into the organization. In this customer also, PaaS is a first-class citizen. Everything we're trying to go PaaS. IaaS as little as possible, if at all, and SaaS is the recommended path forward. So some important concepts. This is a huge culture shift, and it just wouldn't be possible if there wasn't buy-in from the top. And the leadership is all in on this, and they're really driving the ship. And some of the lower organizations have dragged their feet and aren't as on board with it. But with the leadership really pushing it forward, change is starting to happen. I mean, I've been working in Agile for over 10 years, but Agile is a new concept for a lot of these customers. It's been difficult to get them to get their mind shift to Agile, but there's a lot of training. There's a lot of just us showing them how to do things, and slowly but surely they're getting it, and they're starting to move forward with it. And compliance through automation. So we're literally talking about internet as code, stigging. Monitoring and log collection, application support, right? Internet as code is how we're trying to do everything, and Jim's going to talk more about that at his part of the presentation. So we're also talking about real-time security, and out with the old and slow and painful ATO process, and in with the new rolling ATO, ATO in a day. You may have heard some of these things. But that's where we're going with this. And some of the goodness is that the cloud solution providers have done the heavy lifting with FedRamping the cloud environments. We only have to ATO our specific common services, our underlying environment that Jim will show you later. And then the applications, when they're coming into this environment, only have to ATO their little piece of it, right? Everything's inherited. So we're really trying to take the pain out of the ATO process, and the cloud solution providers are helping with that. So this is how we broke down the work. We have two separate work streams. Up here is the environment common services, all right, and in that work stream we're talking about connectivity, identity, security, automation, and self-healing, right? That's the base level for making it possible for these applications to move into the environment. And then the second work stream is application refactoring. Today we're going to talk about app analysis and app migration. All right, and we're going to go in that in a second. But another big shift for this customer was the notion of a migration vendor and a sustainment contractor. So sustainment contractors have been there for a long time. They've built these applications. They may not know a lot about the cloud. The organization wants to move very quickly and get these applications from where they are on-prem into the cloud. So they're bringing in experts from the industry, and that is the migration vendor. The migration vendor's only goal here is to help move that application into the cloud, to train the sustainment contractor, so once it's moved, they can then take it over and support the application going forward. And then post-migration support. So every application migration that we do into this environment starts with an application analysis. We collect metadata and artifacts from that specific application. And over here is what a sample worksheet looks like. Every application has to fill that out before they come into the environment. Then we have a time-boxed amount of time to do the application analysis. So typically it's 10 days. If the application is more complicated, it could be longer, but we try to keep it to 10 days. And the output of that application is an analysis report, and Jim's going to talk more about that later. And so some of the things that we've gained along the way are efficiencies. I mean, we've seen common patterns through a lot of these applications, a lot of these legacy applications. They're using the same technologies, they're following the same patterns. So as we are learning more about it, we're able to do these analysis quicker and quicker. And also it's saving money and time on the migrations on the back end. So now I'm going to walk you through the application migration lifecycle business process. All right. So outside of our purview, the artifact collection takes place, and then there's a cloud determination. The cloud determination is made by an entity that kind of looks at the artifacts and sees, well, does this make more sense, because there's only two clouds right now, to put it in AWS or in Azure. Once that determination is made, it's sent over to a migration vendor, right, who does an application analysis. Typically, that's 10 days worth of work, right? After the application analysis, then there is a review board where they review the analysis and the outputs and decide whether they want to make an investment into moving that application to the cloud. Not all applications are worth moving over. Some of them are just so old and would be just too expensive and just don't lend itself to the cloud. So they're sent down an alternative path. Could be rewriting, could be retirement. All right. Once the decision has been made to invest, right, then we start the application migration. So we're going through this whole process, and all of this is agile. I know it may not look like it right here, but no matter how agile we are, there's still a UAT at the end of that process. I mean, so we're kind of working through that, right? Then there's a cutover, and then it goes to production, and then post-migration support, right, and then transition to the sustainment contractor or whatever team is working on that. Typically, we're talking about a 2 to 3 month time period to migrate an application. And we're looking at making that shorter, again, gaining efficiencies and learning patterns. All along this time, the second that we start the app analysis, we're looking at the authority to operate. And while we're not there at ATO in a day, this is the single biggest issue that we're finding that's preventing us from going to production. So that starts immediately. And then throughout the whole refactoring, the whole migration, we're working with the sustainment contractors and other teams to make sure that they're in the know of what's going on and that they're prepared to take over that application once it goes live. And and so some of the key components over here, again, we talked about the contractor involvement, the training and knowledge transfer, but we're using cloud native automation tools, and where everything is automated, IAC, and we are following Scrum and Agile. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Jim, who's going to run through how we did it and show you some of the nuts and bolts and the fun and the magic. Take it away, Jim.
Okay, I'm going to try to learn how to use a microphone. I don't use them very often, and I'll just hold it for now. The application we migrated that we're going to show here is actually a pretty plain vanilla application. It's not really important what the actual application does, but it's the process we went through. And let me just get this settled here. I got to have my hands free. So the applications, I'll get used to this eventually, I promise. The applications we've analyzed several, fall into several different categories. One of the common ones, and one of the ones that's actually pretty easy to migrate, maybe not necessarily innovate like the previous speaker was talking about in all aspects, but in some ways, are typical ASP.NET IIS-based applications with a SQL Server database in the back end, and they store files in file shares. And a lot of them have session state. We can debate whether or not that's a good idea or not. They have them. And our goal is, in that case, is to get them to the equivalent in Azure. We've also seen applications that are running Java, different flavors of Java. And some of those, not by us, but other vendors, are helping migrate those into Azure as well. You can run Java in Azure just fine. It's not like it can run on many different ways. So I'm going to just show, I have a demo of a sample application that does these 4 things. It doesn't do anything really useful, but it does demonstrate that. But the key to it is it gets deployed into Azure Gov all in an automated fashion. So the true areas of innovation here for this particular application, other than just being able to scale up and scale out in the cloud, in a platform entirely platform as a service solution, where they no longer have to patch the servers, they only have to patch their application. They used to have they really had challenges with just being able to put more servers in play. I've been at a different customer. We needed another CPU added to a server that had slots for it. It took like a year to actually acquire it and get it put in, as that particular application was growing and growing and growing and getting slower and slower and slower. So that's one of the elasticity of it. And they also have very high peak periods and months-long periods where hardly anything's going on. So they really are going to look forward to this scale up, scale down, and save money while they're in their non-active periods. So let me see. Okay, so how do we do that? I think I went backwards. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to show a quick demo. I'm going to have to switch screens here in a second. Hold on. Let's get out of the slide deck for a second. Click. There we go. Okay, so as soon as you guys can see that screen, I'm good to go. So the application developers develop on-prem, on their laptops, on whatever computers they have. They currently run the same application on-prem, of course, and they also test it on-prem. They actually deploy this in 5 or 6 different instances for different customers. It's the same code base all over the place. So one of the other goals of this particular application is we can't break it. We could change it to make it work in Azure and take care of the few little things that didn't work the same way in Azure. And we then, in a lot of cases, we just changed it so it works in both without any kind of branches or switches in the code. And there's a few places where we have to know, well, we're in Azure, we do this, and we're not in Azure, we do this. But that's all got merged into their original code base. So this application doesn't do anything special. You can see that it just reads and writes from the database and from Azure storage. And you can see this I just got a little A/B switch that just switches what it does to show that there's a session state back here. That session's being stored in a Redis cache. Here we've got the same application deployed into Azure. Now in this particular case, I deployed it to this really small, slow instance that's free for demonstration purposes. So it's not quite as quick as the other one, but I could quickly scale it up if I wanted to make it go faster. But the application isn't important here. It's the fact that it's deployed. And in a minute here, I'm going to show you how easy that works. And so I'm actually just going to, I've made a change. If you'll notice in the 2 screens, there was a different color on the screen. I updated the page and I pushed it. And I'm pushing that change up into Visual Studio, up back into the Git repository now. So thanks to the magic of continuous integration and automation tools, I'm now going to build in progress. So this is one of the innovations that you get, not necessarily in the application directly, but in your process, the business model. You want to get this out there to be tested as quickly as possible, and then eventually into the different places where it gets tested and when it goes into production. And the other thing about this is, if you look here, we've got, you'll notice this particular, everything in Azure gets, pretty much almost everything in Azure gets put into a resource group. So in a resource, just there's a collection of resources, and there's, it's a way to package it up. And the way we've organized things within this particular customer is each app gets in this customer we use 3 resource groups, one for networking, one for the app itself, and one for some other common things that everybody needs to do. I put them all in for demo purposes. They're all in one resource group. And you'll notice there's one that has a T in it and one that has a D in it. They're identical. They're provisioned by using infrastructure as a code, as a concept. They can be deployed automatically. I can check in a change to my code for my infrastructure, have it deployed the same way. Or I just run a script that just stamps out these little boxes to put the apps in. And in this case, I get 3 of these, one for dev, test, and prod for this application. For another application, gets the same thing. And the core of it, the basic networking, the basic box, is also identical. And as soon as they're onboarded and we get through the analysis process, they get these. And they don't have to build out anything, and everything's ready for them. And then here's just a list of all the dev resources, the SQL Server, the app services, basically ASP.NET IIS. And again, these are all things where I don't really deal with the servers. I just deal with the service. The platform is the service. Here's the test one. They're all the same. They just have there's a naming convention. Naming conventions are important. So they just have a T in them. And what's happening is something's happening that I don't have to deal with. I'm not going to have to go take a file and go walk to all my servers and deploy something. After the end of my part of this talk, we'll go back and see it got deployed. But that's, and that's not something that's not impossible on the previous ways of doing things, but it is something that is very easy to do with the tools available today, and it's not something that the vendors necessarily know how to do. Standing up a lot of this kind of thing on-prem has traditionally been hard and difficult, and sometimes expensive. So let's go back to our presentation and move on. I'm going to change my screen back to where we were before. Back into our Okay, so I described a little bit of already, but Brett mentioned the two work streams earlier, the common services and the apps. So I talked just a little bit about the apps, but wrapped in that big pyramid is not only the platform itself, but the common services. The common services provide all the things that I don't really want to deal with as an app. I mean, I have to know about them, and I have to collaborate with the people who are responsible, but I don't have to implement them. I don't have to talk. So in our particular case, we got internet users, we got government network people on their own. They have their own networks, and over here we have an existing provider that actually handles all of the networking part of it. It has actually got in place all of the networking that's basically this organization's networking, and we just go into that. So they deal with our DNS, they deal with our IP addresses, and certificates all go in there. Traffic goes through there, and then it enters our system. It's the only front door in, for the most part. It's really the only front door in. And part of our security controls is we don't let anything else in unless it comes out of this pipe. The other thing that this particular shared service, this is really a shared service, provides an identity provider and a SAML provider that actually does our client certificate validation. So the end user's CAT cards get challenged here, validated here, and then the traffic is forwarded to us. And we don't have to, many of the applications, when you look through their instructions on how to deploy, they'll have some third-party piece of software that's actually the certificate validation software. They have to install on all their servers. We don't have to do any of that. The other thing that's in here is all the isolation between the environments. You can't do anything with these environments. You can't even log into Azure Portal unless you've been connected to this identity store here as Azure AD. And we have a remote gateway that allows us to get into these environments. Our mission app administrators and maintainers and auditors come through here, and that's the only access they have. They can't get here from the internet. It's all isolated. There's a high degree of isolation. Down here is where this is our common services area. These are all provided for all the apps. There's this is where we deploy TFS to do deployments. We don't do builds and code compiling and stuff, but we do deployments where we push the artifacts that are delivered by the developers into this environment from here. And as that code goes in here, there's a scanning. That's a common service. So the common services provides So here we have a list of common services. So that networking footprint, we provide email, we provide build support, code scanning, the remote gateway to get in there, as well as all the identity identity service providers for that. Over here on the left, we have kind of a box. The gray box is the subscription. So Common Services has a subscription, an Azure subscription. And inside of that, we provision all of the resource groups, all the networks, and all of the services that are shared by all of the applications. That's all done, again, infrastructure as code. It's all built, we have scripts, templates, and if we, so that they can be re-provisioned or also desired state configuration. A lot of stuff going on where we basically redeploy or not, basically check. We find out if something's changed manually or it gets fixed or we get notified that it changed. That's all happening there. Meanwhile, down here at the bottom, each app owner gets a subscription. And they get their own footprint here, which some of it's stuff that we just give them, and the rest of it's stuff they've decided to put in here. So this is kind of the networking and a couple of other things that are in here are shared responsibility between common services and the application owners. Example, like there's a peering between here and here, a VNet peering. That is really under the control of the common services because this is like, it's a little bit like a data center. You've got to make sure all of your networking meshes together, and that's a hard problem. And the apps got people, they just can't do it because that's not, they rely on networking people on-prem too. We just provide that service here. Now it is a little bit easier here because it's software. It's infrastructure as code. And just to show it, another thing I mentioned here is the same footprint gets stamped out in dev, test, and prod. We don't have to manually do it every 3 times in each of these impact levels. We just do it once and then we reuse it. We have impact level 5 also in the new regions, the DoD regions. So we actually will have customers going in there too. And we stamp that out. So we're getting a lot of reuse of our infrastructure as a code. And then your application goes in the place that it's, wherever it's supposed to go. So for each app, I mentioned this already, we just provision it. There's an example of this command line. It's just, in this case, it's just a very simple command line that I just tell it the name of the app and whether it's the dev, test, or prod environment, and I put a prefix in front of it to isolate it from everything else. Our customer, it's actually a more complex naming scheme, but that's really not the important thing. The important thing is that you can, and there's also tagging that goes on. And tagging is something, if you're familiar with Azure, where you can use to help building purposes to, and other reasons, find things, and manage your billing and stuff. Okay, application analysis. So how do we do that? Brett already mentioned some of the artifacts or inputs to this process. We need to see the code. We need to see the data. Now, we can't always get a hold of the databases themselves, but we really need to look in depth at the code and at the data, because that's where things are hidden that can be an issue. We look at configuration files, installation instructions. We're looking for things that we already know might need to be changed if we move to Azure. Big area that might be different is authentication. So a lot of applications might just rely on a very simple on-prem enterprise Active Directory and use Windows authentication. That might not work the same in the cloud. We do all of that. We look very deep in all of those things so we can actually produce an architecture and some sort of estimate of effort so that we can actually put a cost and put that proposal together. We had one that was a much larger group, a more complicated app, and we just brought more people in because we needed to look at every line of code, or as much of the code as we could, so we can look for those things. And like I said, not all applications make sense for us to go fast with. They may need a longer path where they need to do actual re-architecting to fit something. So one of our goals in this go fast model isn't necessarily, we're not trying to rewrite these applications. We're just trying to get them into the cloud. Now, sometimes that means, given a 2 to 3 month time frame, we aren't necessarily going to make major changes. In many cases, specifically this example, you might have 10,000 lines of code, and we might have to change a couple hundred source. We might have to make 5 lines of code change for something. It's really, the first version of this was running in the cloud in a couple weeks. And obviously it had stuff that's still to be done, but you can get an ASP.NET application running in an app service almost instantaneously, and then you can tackle the things that need to be changed. So there are going to be changes, but the other thing to mention here is, we mentioned already, Target Platform as a Service is our sweet spot. Azure App Services offer basically almost exact replacement. Azure for IIS ASP.NET, it is IIS ASP.NET, it's just hosted differently. And Azure SQL is also another one where there is, depending on, there's a few things you can do in an Azure SQL, in a SQL database that don't fit, but usually you can change them and get them factored out fairly quickly. We've migrated several databases, and it takes a few days, but it's not like months. And obviously everything's done using Scrum. Test early and often, and we did testing in a bunch of different ways. The testing relies heavily on the mission owner, because they know this application. This application is done, built, running. We learned enough to test what we built, but we had to work very closely with them to make sure that we were always in the pipeline for them to be testing too, because they can really exercise it much better than we can in terms of knowing all the code paths, all the logic that needs to be tested. Yeah. And another thing is test automation is useful. Very want to ever reach. I probably don't even need that. Can everybody hear me okay? I should have asked this about 10 minutes ago. Okay. This is just an example of some of the things I just mentioned, the different kinds of things that you see, application components and the things that we do with them to make them work in Azure. I already mentioned most of them. I don't need to go in here. We can have a discussion about specific things if you have any questions later. So this is a bigger example. The diagram I showed you before was really just the sample application. This is the application that shows a little bit more complexity to the application we migrated. So there's more pieces to the puzzle, but it does basically. So let's just go back and see what happened with our application that we deployed. Just take a second to switch back. Actually, never mind, let's do this. Okay, so there's not a lot of magic here. The real magic is the fact that I talked for all that time. I didn't have to do anything. It's all just done. So I will show you. So here's the one that we deployed, and it's going to take it's an ASP.NET application, so it does have a little bit of ramp-up time. It's also running on a basic free tier Azure App Service, so it takes a little bit of time to renovate. But you'll notice if everything works the way I expected it to, the background of the Gov Innovation should turn aqua. We'll give that a minute to refresh. The other thing is, this is the test one. I deployed it. I provisioned it, but I never deployed the application. And this is the default out-of-the-box website that's deployed with it. So you can see that it's running, it's deployed, it's been provisioned, and all it's waiting for is us to run our build release pipeline. Come on, let's go. There we go, it happened. So, yay. The key there is I pushed my change, whether it's infrastructure or application code, and it's there. And this obviously can be done on-prem, but it's cloud and the Visual Studio Team Services and all the tools you have available for this kind of application, and really any modern application, you really need to automate, change your business model of your development model, because then you start opening up continuous deployment, automated testing, access to scalability and elasticity. So I think that's all I got for now. Let me just get back on the slides so Brett can wrap it up.
Thanks, everybody. We have a slide for lessons learned, but if anyone has any questions, we're here. We'll be here afterwards, too. Do we have time for questions?
I think we need
All
to
right,
go to the next
we're just
speaker.
going to go to the next one. Come see us after the talk, and we'll go over stuff. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
So with that, I would like to welcome C3 IoT. Thank you so much, AIS, for that great presentation.